and welcome back to part 2 of Realizations, Decisions, and Actions. I'm Dr. Bellware. This is going to be the narratology portion of spotting for films. That's right, it's all about narratology. So just as a little reminder of where we are and where we're going, we've done the introduction, and this is going to be the narrative analysis for spotting music for motion pictures. Now, I'm not going to read this, but this is a pretty good definition. Wikipedia is not a bad place to start if you really want to go into learning a lot about narratology and what it's all about. And the place where I got hung up, which a lot of people would get hung up, is learning about fabula and Chouzette. These are words, by the way, that as far as I can tell, they're translated from French to Russian and then back into French and then into English. So like so many things in music for films, it's a mistranslation from the Russian. But, and again, I'm not going to read this, but if you'd like to learn more, this would be the sort of direction to go in. Or my suggestion would be to start with Mieke Bal. She is, I believe, a Dutch academic, and she wrote a book, Narratology, Introduction to the Theory of Narrative, which is one of the easier, in my opinion, books to understand. There's also the Oxford Narratology, Introduction to Narratology, I think it's called, which is also perfectly fine. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to use sort of my own definition of these terms, knowing three things. One is that this method, using these kinds of definitions, works for me. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you, and that you should take what works for you and not take the stuff that doesn't work for you. And also, my definitions are just not canonical in any way. So when I break it down, this is just my way of breaking down how narratology works. It has nothing to do with, again, if you were to be in a class with Mieke Bal or any real narratologist, they might have a different and better definition, but I don't think a better definition for spotting for films. So what is narratology? Narratology is a lens to understand story. It's just a way to look at the framework of the story. And we need to know that if we are making music for drama, because, the story's the thing that we're doing. It is tragically ill-defined, and I just wish that weren't true. But it's also spectacularly important. So it would be nicer if it were better defined. But I'm going to be defining it for our purposes here. The thing about narratology is you have to understand that it's the idea of layers in a narrative. And there's two basic kinds of layers. One is chronological, and the other is a point of view. The chronology has to do with the way that the story is told, the chronological order that the story is told in, which is not always linear, and the points of view of the story, which can change. However, they are usually, and I really just mean this generally, the point of view is one character, although inevitably there's going to be scenes where the point of view will change to be another character's for that scene. So let's look at the chronology of stories. We are frequently brought back and forth in time through flashbacks and flash forward, whether it's Quinn's scene in the movie Jaws, where he talks about the USS Indianapolis and how during World War II he was in the water with all the sharks, or even in the story of Macbeth. Lady Macbeth receives a letter that she reads that gives her sort of a recap of the play, but it is a flashback. But there's a wide variety of changes in time, and each one of those different timelines that happens in a story is another layer in the story. It's another layer in the chronology. These are a really good place to be looking out for when it comes to places that might need to be reinforced dramatically with music. Now, points of view, and the point of view is vital to understand. You have to know who the narrator is, or the implied narrator, or whose point of view it is. So narrator can mean, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily a voiceover telling you what's going on. There's usually a character through whom the story is told. Getting back to the example of Macbeth, it's mostly Macbeth. In Lady Macbeth's first scene, though, with the letter, that scene is clearly her scene. She has the agency. She makes decisions in that scene. We get to that later. But it's very important to understand the narrator or the point of view of the dramatic work. Is the narrator reliable? The reliability of that narrator or the implied narrator is also extremely important. So, and whose story it is might be separate from the literal narrator. Like there's a literal narrator in the Coen brothers film, The Big Lebowski. That literal narrator is not the person whose story it is actually Lebowski. That's important to know. That is important to understand. Some dramas don't actually tell you whose story it is until the end. That can be kind of tricky to do, but if the story does do that, boy oh boy, you better know it. For instance, Hamlet is kind of a story that's arguably mostly Horatio's point of view. You could argue that. Although most scenes are about Hamlet's decisions, and that's who has agency in a scene, who makes decisions, I would say is a strong indicator of whose scene it is. And you'll find in a lot of different dramas, the person whose scene it is can change, but usually the overall drama is one person or another's. These are all things to pay attention to. Now here's some things I'm just going to say about music. We can demonstrate that the music can take all of the meaning that was created by the writer and the director and the actors and the art department, and the music can destroy everything they thought they were doing. Or the music can make it all perfect. That does not mean that there's only one kind of music that will make a given kind of drama work. But what it does mean is that the music will dictate what it was that everybody else had been doing all this time in creating the drama. The music will determine what the world is. So you can go and put an avant-weird pop soundtrack on top of a Western, and that's the world that it creates. It's going to be avant-weird Western. Or you can use very old-timey music and put it in a science fiction movie, and that is what you will have. Or you can put some Cardigan songs in a Romeo and Juliet, and that is the world you will have created in that Romeo and Juliet. The music comes from the world. The music doesn't lie. The music knows all the secrets. And whatever the music does, that's what everything is. Now, for practical purposes, consider placements of cues when, for instance, the point of view changes, which also, incidentally, means when the scenes change, and when time changes. Flashbacks, flash forwards, these are all important dramatic moments that you should be aware of. So, point of view, let me go backward. Who is the narrator? Is there an audience? How reliable is this narrator? Whose story is it? These are all critical things. So now let's take a look at this scene, but I will talk over it the way that I should have talked over it the first time you saw it, and see what we can discover. So here's an establishing shot. That was a narrative layer change into this room. This is a two-hander scene. We've got two characters. We have Amanda Sale playing Delta there on your left, and Sarah Schoafs playing Sagan on our right. So the first thing that we might want to know is the perspective of this scene. Who is the narrator or the implied narrator? And in this movie, it is Sagan's. That's the character on our right. It's her movie. She, and this is the spoiler, survives to the end. She realizes that she is also a robot, so it's her movie. However, this particular scene belongs to Delta. Delta is the character on our left. Delta has the agency in this scene. She has the ability to make decisions in this scene. And she is deliberately alluding to but holding back on specific information about Sagan that Delta realizes. So the other set of questions involves the chronological order of the story. This story is based around an event that occurred thousands of years in the past for the entire movie. The big secret is that Sagan actually destroyed the Earth and wiped out humanity. But she's unaware of that fact. Delta is aware of that fact, but doesn't really want to break it to Sagan all at once because she's a little bit worried about Sagan. And everyone has been lying to Sagan, making her think that she's human all of this time. The movie actually takes place over the course of thousands and thousands of years. These things are all very, very important. And when you're scoring music for a picture, you really need to have an understanding, a sort of a global understanding of the story. You have to understand the perspective of the story. You have to understand how the chronology of the story plays out, what the order of the story is. You have to know if you've gone back in time or gone forward in time, and you have to have an understanding of whether or not in the story you've changed the place or literally done a scene change. These are all critical things to understand as a film composer. And specifically with this scene, these are all things you'd have to know about the overall work, not just this one scene out of context, because it's virtually impossible to score a scene out of context. You really have to know what the whole thing is about. So, chronological order of the story and the perspective, these are all vital to understanding the story enough to be able to enhance that drama rather than running headlong into it. So next time, we will be looking at dramatic theory and actually getting to some very specific places in the story where we might underline with musical cues to increase the drama or reinforce the drama. I'll see you then.